All right, welcome to Bold Talk series where creativity, leadership, ideas, and innovation come together. My name is Ludvik, and today I have a privilege to have a short one-on-one conversation with Casey Ellis, the founder of Bugcrowd. Casey, great seeing you, and welcome to our Bold Talk series. How are you?
Doing well, Epi. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, that's great. Good to see you, and looking forward to this conversation. Should we start with some questions here all the way?
Let's go for it. Yeah, sounds good.
Let's do it. Awesome. So, Casey, tell us about how did the journey begin with Bugcrowd and why the focus on cybersecurity?
I mean, basically, that was where I came from. And I grew up hacking things. My first job, from a career standpoint, was in network engineering, which quickly turned into a pen test role. And I kind of fell in love with security, back in the very early stages of my career. So it was always going to be something that I'd kind of focus on and build around. I think really the journey with Bugcrowd started when I was looking at the idea of being able to outsmart the adversary on a consistent basis. Like when you think about what we do as cybersecurity defenders, it's really to balance out and ideally, outsmart the adversary on a consistent basis. And when you think about one person being paid to do that by the hour, or the available automation at the time, versus this huge swarm of adversaries with all of the different motivations they've got, all of the different skills they've got, and really their incentive to get in for whatever reason is driving them, like we're going to fail on the defensive side eventually, just because of the math. Like they've got a crowd and we don't. So the origin for Bugcrowd was really a combination of coming out of the hacker community and just loving security and wanting to build solutions in that space, and seeing the fact that there was this latent potential locked up in the white hat community, as well as this unmet demand on the defender side, and wanting to plug those two things in together. And that was 11 years ago now. So so far so good.
Wow. So you pioneered this concept of crowdsource cybersecurity as a service. So that was back then. How do you see that future of crowdsourced cybersecurity evolving in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, I think to answer that, I look at it as how has it evolved over the last 10. When you think about what we were working on in 2012 when I kicked the company off, it was primarily web and infrastructure security, a little bit of binary type work. And all of a sudden, mobile application security became a thing that we needed to deal with. And then all of a sudden, IoT security became a thing that we needed to deal with. Then we needed to start thinking about securing cars. Now we're talking about AI and ChatGPT and different things like that. There's a constantly evolving attack surface to deal with as defenders, and that's never going to stop because innovation, marches on. It's like we're, as technologists and as people building the internet, we're always trying to come up with new things. Really over those last 10 years, our job has been to work out how to understand, what the crowd's capable of, then combine that with what we see coming over the hill next from a technology and a threat standpoint, and be as flexible as we possibly can to be able to deliver the right creative skills into the problems that exist. And to do that, we've basically built out, the equivalent of a dating website for people that break computers. It's actually quite flexible in how it's designed and more focused on traits rather than it is on specific tech stacks, because we honestly don't know what's going to come next. We can make some good guesses, but security is always going to evolve. The adversary is always going to evolve. I think even the international relations environment that we're in that defines security in the first place is evolving quite a bit as well. And I think that's going to continue to be true. So the one thing I would safely predict is that the role of human creativity in cybersecurity as a part of the solution is going to become more and more obvious, as it has for the past 10 years. And I do believe that the role of things like machine learning, AI, automation, as not a replacement for human creativity, but as an incredible lever for creative people to use, I think that's going to become more obvious and more apparent as well.
Yeah, obviously you work with a lot of large companies. How
Yeah.
does organization they foster this culture that encourages creative problem solving in the context of a cybersecurity in this case?
Yeah, this is one that I talk about a lot. I think probably the biggest thing is to never assume that you're perfect. This is oftentimes a reason I believe why we see more friction with older, more established organizations compared to newer ones that are cloud native, more agile, almost by default, if that makes sense. And I'm not just talking about engineering; I'm talking about how the company itself operates.
Hmm.
Um, I think, the more the more fluid and the more versatile you are as an organization to begin with, the more the easier it is to kind of accept this idea that, like, we're not perfect. Let's not assume that we can do a security thing and then dust our hands off and call it job done, because it's the role of the adversary to innovate past our defenses, and that's always going to be true. So I think that's a really important, because that almost requires a culture of humility. It's not saying that you're terrible at this stuff. It basically says that you're not perfect, and that's because that's literally the nature of what we're doing. Humans do incredible things when they build software and they write code and they come up with new business ideas and all that other stuff. But humans aren't perfect, and some of those imperfections lead to vulnerabilities that the bad guys can exploit. That's a function of being human. It's not because we're terrible or good or any of the other stuff. It's just a part of what makes up who we are. So I think being able to, as an organization, be comfortable with that, and always be looking for the next set of things, the next set of rational risks to burn down. I think what you end up with is a culture that fosters creativity and fosters ideation that can create new opportunities to do that well.
Obviously, these threats are constantly evolving. You start to see the hackers become creative. They're, they have hackers, they're individuals, but you also have a state funded. How do you stay ahead of the curve when it comes to this type of innovation, adopting it to these kind of challenges in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I actually try to advocate, the way I've always done it, and what I try to advocate is to basically do as best you can to step into their shoes. And I think the easiest way for people that aren't necessarily, hackers, or don't necessarily identify in that way, to do that is to just view it as a business. Like entrepreneurship, when you think about it, criminals, cyber criminals are just basically entrepreneurs without rules or ethics. And most of the rest of what goes on that motivates you as a business owner is basically the same. So, thinking about, like, what are their incentives? What are their takes? Why are they doing this? What would I do in their shoes? Thinking about your own organization and considering this idea of, like, if I was a bad guy who was able to get access to my systems, or to deny me access to my systems, or perform extortion, or do whatever else, like, how would I do that? What would be the best way for me to make the most money possible out of what they potentially be able to achieve? I think what that does is it allows an organization to think about risk and cybersecurity in a far more rational way. I think without doing that, it's like this scary internet boogeyman that just does random, like, boogeyman stuff. And that creates fear, which I think is useful in terms of being able to respect the actual nature of the problem, but it's sort of terrifying to the point where people just sort of give up, or get paralyzed by that, or just want to ignore it and not talk about it, right? I think this idea of attackers have objectives, and those objectives are economically rational, and that works in exactly the same way as it does when you're trying to build a company. I think there's a lot that can be taken from that to start to think about what's coming around the next set of corners. Like, what are they going to attack next? When you think about what's happened over the past period of time, we've seen the ransom model basically just be incredibly successful, to the point where there's now money available for them to reinvest into techniques and tooling and hiring and all those different things. That's at this point got them behaving more like a nation state would in old times. And at the same time, you've got nation states who are starting to get a lot more overt in their attacks. It used to be that nation states were very concerned about being stealthy, and nowadays that's less true. You look at things like SolarWinds, like, that was a very noisy attack. It was highly sophisticated, but once it was detected, it was quite loud and quite broad. So just thinking about what's motivating these folk, and trying to get in behind that a little bit. Not everyone needs to necessarily become an expert, but I think there are some pretty basic tools that you can use to think in that way. And one of them I just outlined, just thinking of them as business people and starting there.
Yeah. Um, does these attacks sometimes keep you awake at night, and wonder, like, what you wake up
Look,
and you have such an attack from a customer that you're like, holy crap.
I've been doing this my entire career, and I've seen
Yeah.
a lot of stuff. So, like, I'm probably on the extreme end of unflappable when it comes to it's one of those ones where I think things that keep me awake at night are just really the preparedness
Yeah.
that the vendors have to stay ahead of this stuff. obviously from the lens of Bugcrowd, wanting to put as many brains as they can borrow in their hands to be able to actually make those predictions and make good decisions and actually outsmart the adversary, do that as best we can. I think there is an angle to this where you don't often hear security vendors talk like this, but I do believe that between now and the heat death of the universe, everyone's going to suffer a breach of some sort. Like that's just an issue of information physics and the motivations of the adversary. So the goal, the problem to solve actually becomes delaying that in as economically rational a way you can for as long as possible, and then being able to recover quickly, when that does happen. Convincing people that that's actually the problem, that occasionally keeps me awake at night. And then I think going back to the question just before, convincing people to actually, trust and open themselves up to the creativity that exists globally. It's not just the people in the four walls of your organization that can help you answer these questions. It's everyone, because ultimately the internet's kind of a team sport, right? Yeah. So convincing people to actually activate that and engage that's a lot of what I spend my time doing from a company standpoint, obviously, but I also believe it's truly a fundamental part of the solution.
Yeah, I've seen you grow in the company quite big, early days. Talk about teams. What strategies do you use to encourage creativity and innovation within your team?
Yeah, look, to me, it all starts with leadership. You've got to foster a culture of academic honesty, and then I think humility again comes into play. To me, humility it's not about false humility where everything's broken and I'm terrible at everything. I think humility gets kind of a bad rap in that direction a lot. To me, it's more about the fact that if you and I go to the mat on these three things, I know for a fact that I'm going to win because I'm world class at those three things. But then there's everything else. And everything else I'm going to need some help with. So like creating a culture that supports that idea. There's a confidence and skill, but then there's also like almost a radical openness to learning and acceptance of ideas. The closer you can get to that, I think the faster things are able to innovate and move. And at the same time, setting a very clear North Star, because the downside of too much innovation, especially, this is something that you experience, I think, more as you get larger and more scaled as an organization, is that innovation and scale don't tend to play that well together. There's things that you want to, not change too much. And then there's things that you want to change and continue to grow. So working out how to make sure that everyone understands where the North Star is and what the core kind of set things are that you've established and that you now know are true and you don't want to change too much. And then again, opening up the other things to be improved. Integrating those ideas, I think just fostering and encouraging a culture of innovation. And really it starts, as I said, with leadership, but I think the way that that's manifested is within the culture of the team. If you look around within the organization and there is a draw and a drive towards innovation that you can just kind of see, to me, that's early evidence of the fact that you're doing it right, but then you've got to operationalize that as well.
Yeah, operationalizing is very important.
Ideas are cheap. I think that's the other part for leaders to think about. Like all the ideas in the world, that's great, but they basically net out to a fun conversation at a bar unless you manage to put wheels on the bus. So continually working on better ways to do that and how to actually operationalize and implement. I think that's a really important thing to continually improve as well.
Yeah, there's this saying, what is it, like talent is cheap and discipline is expensive, right? So,
that's 100% true.
Same applies to that too. Talk about the aspiring leaders looking to make a mark in the cybersecurity. What advice would you give to them? Obviously, there's a drive that drives you to see less of the attacks and better world in terms of the living in a more harmonious world. What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, the biggest piece of advice, I spend a lot of time with founders, honestly, mostly motivated by the fact that, a lot of founders spend a lot of time with me to help me bone up. As Bugcrowd wasn't my first rodeo as a business owner, but it's the first time I've done a venture-backed company, and I had to learn a lot of stuff very quickly, and continue to be in that position today. And there's been a lot of folks that I do genuinely believe that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, 99% of the time. So as best I can pay that forward with the things that I'm good at and with the things that I've learned, I try to do that. And to me, probably the biggest thing for aspiring entrepreneurs in cybersecurity, so people that haven't done it yet, is to just go, just do it, start, like find whatever way you can to get the shovel out and put it in the ground, because there will never be a perfect time. The way that this market evolves, there's always something new happening that's going to drive the next set of innovation in this space. And I think the thing that does hold, entrepreneurs in general back, and especially those in security who maybe are thinking about risk more than your average person, is that they don't feel like they're ready. It's like, I don't have the right business skills, or I don't have enough cash in the bank, or I don't know, kind of like all these things. The ducks aren't fully in a row for me to take the shot just yet. And to me, like, that time will never come. You have to actually create it. You've got to get yourself to a point where you're irrationally convicted and you're irrationally kind of pissed off about a problem that you think that you can solve. And once you believe you're at that point, then just get going. And then the second part would be surround yourself with people that can help. Go out and ask folk dumb questions, things that are going to feel awkward and like you're kind of tipping your hand around things that you don't know. Be wise in how you do that, obviously, but get mentors around you, offer them coffee, go out and listen to them, ask them stuff, ignore probably about 80% of what they tell you, because you're not handing them the wheel. Like, you keep that steering wheel, but try to learn from the patterns that made them successful and see what of those things are going to help you on your journey. I think that's advice that pretty much anyone can take. I think I try to not be too prescriptive when I answer questions like this one, but that, I think, is a pretty globally useful answer.
Yeah. Commit first, figure out later, in a way, right?
Sorry, I missed that.
Commit first, figure out later.
I mean, that's what founding's about. You like that expression of jumping off the cliff and then figuring out how to build the plane on the way down. You only do it, like, what I'm not saying is be reckless, because you do want to, maintain rational thinking and how you do stuff like that, right? But there's a lot of it that feels like that. Like, with Bugcrowd, it was literally lighting the wick and figuring out how to fly the rocket once the motor started. Because once this idea was out of the gate, it was very clear that it wasn't going back in. So at that point in time, there was a lot of stuff that was like, okay, how do you spin up a finance department? How do you do HR in California, when obviously I'm not originally from California? Different things like that you just got to figure out how to do on the fly. I think a lot of that for a leader comes from mentorship, and then it ultimately manifests in who you hire and how you build your team out.
Yeah. Last final thoughts, bold thoughts, Casey.
Look, I think the pursuit of possibility and the pursuit of potential is one of the most, ultimately that's going to end up on my headstone at some point. Hopefully not too soon. I don't predict that part, but the idea of just the pursuit of potential is this incredibly, it's noble, I think, just because humans are awesome, and our expression of creativity in whatever form it takes, I think, is worth pursuing. And looking to find ways to unleash that and unlock that into the rest of the world. To me, that really comes down to why we're all so creative in the first place. I think that's actually the role that we play as individuals and as a corporate group. So, people that are listening to this, people that want to be bold, I think if you're listening to this webinar in the first place, you're probably on that same page. And I just think getting conviction about that, it's like, no, this is actually a valuable and a powerful thing to do. It's an incredible responsibility. It's not something that you take on with hubris and just kind of run through walls without being considerate of the folk around you and all those different things. But still, you got to run through those walls and you got to figure out how to do it well. And I think that's an incredibly valuable and important thing to do. People that have the appetite to do that, once again, go now. Like, just figure out how you're gonna, as I said, get the shovel out, put it in the dirt, and work it out from there.
And certainly you've done it well, Casey. Congratulations on all your achievements. Thank you for joining me, and look forward to our next conversation in the near future. Take care and be bold always.
Likewise, Epi. Cheers.
Cheers.